Hiraku died a worthless virgin. However, he was reincarnated as an overpowered farmer who tamed an army of monster girls so he could get freaky and help them repopulate using his divine farming bone. After dying a lonely, pathetic life, Hiraku suddenly woke up before God himself. God apologized for giving him cancer for free and offered to give him a new life with a healthy body. He requested to be able to live out his dream farming, while living a quiet life away from civilization and clapping as many baddies as he could for the rest of his life.
Yeah, boy.
God then blessed him with the legendary farming tool, and moments later, he found himself in a poor-ass fantasy world. When Hiraku woke up, he told himself he would enjoy this new life and healthy body. He realized God placed him in the middle of nowhere, then began his journey as a wandering homeless man. He spent the following days looking for food and water, then discovered a large tree and used it as his base for shelter, since he was currently a bum. Using his legendary farming tool, which could take on any form, he began building his new life. Hiraku began cultivating the land and noticed he didn't get tired or hungry while using the farming tool. Suddenly, a disgusting demon rabbit appeared and charged him. However, Hiraku unalived it in one blow. He butchered it for its meat and cooked it over his fire, and when he tasted it, it tasted like garbage. Next, he built a porta potty so he could take massive dumps after eating your mother's disgusting cooking. He thought about what type of crops to grow as he cultivated the land. After slaving away for an entire day, he realized he didn't have any seeds, then went to bed depressed and lonely. The next morning, his crippling depression went away when he saw sprouts popping up in every row. He realized he could grow anything while slaving away using the farming tool. Next, he built a fence around the perimeter and a trench around the fence to guard against those vile rabbits in case they came back. After a few days of slaving, he finally built a homeless shelter. One day, Hiraku came outside to a pair of injured inferno wolves. He noticed they were fucked up and brought them in, then fed them the extra meat from the boar he had just obliterated. He noticed one of them got cracked and had a round belly. However, she suddenly began giving birth, so he brought them into the shelter. He thought about what to do, then made them a fire right outside and gave them some privacy for the night. When he woke up the next morning, he jumped up and ran over to the sight of 4 beautiful puppies sipping on some drink. He brought them some boar meat to celebrate their new babies. They felt attached to the shelter, so he built himself a new house right next door. After Hiraku harvested his first batch of success, he named the boy Kuro and the girl Yuki. They hunted for food for him and protected the farm's perimeter since he was a weak peasant. Meanwhile, God wondered how Hiraku was doing and decided to check on him. However, he soon realized he messed up as he placed him inside the Forest of Death, a place infested with wicked monsters. Hiraku realized the plants that began growing were the vegetables he was thinking of while plowing the land. He tested the theory and began chanting bean sprouts at the soil like a deranged lunatic, which led to bean sprouts growing. The crops he planted with the legendary farming tool grew extraordinarily quickly. To show his gratitude to the gods that gave him his new life, he built a statue and a shrine for the god of agriculture and the supreme being that gave him cancer. Hiraku made a stew with the rabbit meat and his organic Whole Foods vegetables, but he had no seasoning, so it tasted like utter trash. He planted some fruit-bearing trees next, but thought it would take some years to grow. He was able to travel farther into the forest with the help of the wolves and discovered a river. On the way back, he turned the farming tool into a wheelbarrow and tried to wheel Kuro back home. However, he never got his license in his old life and crashed the whip. One day, it started to get cold. He tried to make pellets from the rabbits, but they smelled like dead bodies, so he threw them away. Suddenly, a greater demon spider greeted him and weaved a luxury Gunnar rag for him. After that, it started living up in the giant tree. Hiraku traded fresh taters for clothes since he was a homeless loser living in the woods. It created all types of items for his home to make it less like a shelter and more like a loving home, so he ended up naming the weaving spider Zabuton. When winter had finally arrived, it had gotten really cold and Hiraku stayed inside with the dogs, while Zabuton hibernated in the tree. The food he had stored ahead of time should last until the end of winter. However, he wished he had some salt and pepper. While sitting in the freezing cold, he thought about how long it had been since he'd talked to someone and how it started to feel real lonely. Once spring came along, the freeloading puppies left the farm and entered the forest on their own. They all came back a few days later and found baddies for themselves to crack.
My man.
After being alone for a while, Zabuton showed up with a bunch of filthy creatures. Everyone had a family except him. Suddenly, Hiraku heard Zabuton's ritualistic alarm coming from the top of the tree. Kuro came over, then led him into the forest where he found a girl named Lu. All of the wolves and Zabuton were growling at her. The girl then turned to him and begged him for help. Hiraku walked over and tried to give her his jacket. However, she jumped up, bit his neck, and sucked his blood. Her body began to glow as she suddenly grew and turned into a busty baddie.
Yeah, boy.
Suddenly, the wolves obliterated her and jumped her yet again. According to her, she was a vampire and she sucked his blood so she could recover her mana, which she used to maintain her form and clothes. However, when the wolves tore her apart, she turned small again. Hiraku felt bad for her, so he offered her more of his blood to suck so she could recover. When he showed her his farm, she was amazed to see so many crops she had never seen before. Apparently, she's an expert and researches medicinal plants. She came to the forest because she got into a dispute with some nobles who were trying to steal her research. After she ran away, they sent an assassin after her. She then complimented him on taming those savage beasts and brought up the forest's reputation. However, he had no idea. Hiraku couldn't believe he met a baddie like her in the middle of the forest, and thought to himself an opportunity to start clapping like this would never come again.
My man.
Lou thought since he was out here bumming around the forest, she asked if she could come back and visit. However, Hiraku requested that she would stay there with him forever. He then got on his knees and begged if he could blow the vampire's back out. Lou mentioned she would be putting his life in danger. After all, she had people after her head. Hiraku didn't care. He had never been good with people, and the reason he was homeless was because he wanted to be away from people. However, he wasn't sure how many more years he could handle it. Lou thought it was such a sudden proposal and hesitated to answer. Hiraku realized it was a proposal to crack and then implored her once again to accept. Lou then agreed and accepted his proposal, and so they could begin clapping all year long.
Yeah, boy.
Lou made excessive improvements to his peasant lifestyle in exchange for growing medicinal herbs in the cotton fields. She used magic to create a light source in the porta potty for when they needed to take a dump. During a meal, she asked if he didn't like using salt, but he told her he didn't know where to find any. However, she felt extreme sympathy for his idiotic statement. She pointed at the dirt and said it was found in the ground. They could dissolve and boil it, which left him utterly speechless. While checking out the fruit trees, Zabuton suddenly sounded the alarm. They went into the forest and saw an angel named Taya being torn up by his wolves. After saving her, Hiraku noticed her using magic to heal herself, then looked over at Lou creeping away. The angelic melon cannons called her out on running. However, the wolves attacked her for being hostile towards the master's new clapping partner. Once inside, Lou mentioned they attacked her as well. They're ruthless. Magic doesn't affect them and they dodge spells as well. When Tia asked who was this Giga Chad beside her, Lou blushed and said he was her new clapping partner. When Tia introduced herself and told Hiraku she was an angel, he asked if she served God, but Lou said they were just a race of warriors with super low IQ. Hiraku asked why she was chasing down his personal baddie, and Tia explained she had a bounty on her head from a rampage she had caused. Lou explained there was an insufferable noble that kept forcing her to create medicine and drugs for him without payment. Tia, however, claimed she got mad over a small dispute and blew up the place. While the two bickered, Hiraku thought they got along pretty well. Lou explained she was running because the massive angelic melon cannons was far more powerful than she was. Tia thought she had matured since that was something she would never admit before. Lou, however, realized how weak and pathetic she truly was fighting the legendary wolves outside. She suddenly popped up and asked if she wanted to move in and get her back blown out as well.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
They showed her the orchard where their fruits grew, then their crop field where they grew vegetables, and when she showed her Zabuton, she fainted. Hiraku showed her how to harvest a piece of cabbage and then coerced her into helping out and harvesting vegetables. He then peeled off a leaf and sprinkled salt over, then served it to her as if she was a goat. At the end of the day, the girls cleaned and healed their fatigue using magic, causing the poor magicless peasant to get jealous. Once inside, Tia tried a strawberry and thought it tasted magnificent. After a hard day's work, she thought that farming was a lot more fulfilling than she expected. Lou got excited and asked her if she would be willing to stay. Tia hesitated, however. Lou then whispered that she wouldn't be able to tame the massive cultivation serpent on her own, with a diabolical grin. Hiraku and Lou spent the following days showing her the duties of a slave, while the girls used their magic to help expand the farm. On the way back, Tia asked if they could grow more strawberries. However, Hiraku declined since they were already operating at maximum capacity. If they expanded the crop fields, they wouldn't be able to keep up with the harvesting and possibly not finish eating everything they harvested either. When they got back, the new puppies had arrived. The freeloading puppies that left the camp had their own freeloading puppies and sent them back. Hiraku realized they could begin having puppies as well and decided to build a stable stable for them next to the orchard. One day, Zabuton's little soldiers saluted Hiraku, then parachuted away into war. However, a few didn't make the physical requirements and stayed behind. Tia informed Hiraku that she would be leaving and would be back in a little while. A few days later, Tia came back with a group of elves all ready to start clapping for Hiraku.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
They introduced themselves as Leia, Leaf, Lakat, Lise, Lili, Lita, and Lise. They all came because Tia told them to, and they could partake in the clapping festivities.
Yeah, boy.
Tia mentioned they all had a tragic backstory. They all used to live in a village up north, but most of them were wiped out after being dragged into the War of the Humans. They got scattered, and ever since they had been homeless, looking for a place to call home. Leah then pleaded with him to allow them to stay and repopulate there. Tia said they were hard workers, and Lu mentioned they were a talented race. Hiraku then agreed since there would be elven backs to blow out for the coming years.
What do you mean by that?
Leia asked where the other villagers were, and Lu introduced them to Zabuton and then to the Inferno Wolves, which shocked them. All 7 of them wanted to live together, so they needed to build one big house. Hiraku cut down an unbreakable tree that was harder than steel with his farming tool, which made the elves' water fountain erupt. When it came to construction, they knew a lot more than he did. After only 10 days, the Mega Baddie shelter was built. Lu and Tia complimented their construction skills and thought it looked a lot better than their little mud hut, which shattered Hiraku's dignity. Leia told Hiraku they used fire and ate meat as well, but Hiraku thought they lived in the woods and lived like Amish peasants, excluded from the world. However, Leia ridiculed him and thought that was absurd, then asked how would you live in the woods without the use of fire. He pretty much thought elves were some dirty bums that slept in the forest like a bunch of vagrants. Leia then told him as thanks for taking in the bummy milk jugs, they could do some mining and blacksmithing for him. She wanted to start by building a furnace that could melt iron. When he heard that, he thought of ugly dwarfs, however, anyone would prefer baddie elves over short abominations. Following Leah's instructions, they built a smithing workstation. They put charcoal and iron sand taken from the river into the furnace and heated it up, then pounded the melted iron to process it. When they presented the finished product, Hiraku was amazed and thought they were capable of anything. Leah mentioned it was the result of being homeless for 200 years. The only thing they couldn't do was settle down and reproduce. Hiraku thought it was great that he took care of one of those goals for them. However, they smiled diabolically as they hoped to eventually take a ride on the charged-up meat spaceship.
Nice.
The girls approached Hiraku and asked about his wheat field. He mentioned they had already processed it into flour, and Leaf reluctantly asked if she could make bread for everyone. Hiraku excitedly said yes and told her to do as she pleased. They began shaping the dough and making the bread together as a group. When Hiraku took a bite, he was surprised as he thought it tasted like fresh bakery bread from Japan. Hiraku suddenly asked Lu if the land they were slaving away on was owned by anyone. She mentioned the forest was under the control of the Demon Lord. Hiraku asked if there would be any beef because he set up shop in his territory. However, Lu thought since he created everything without any support, he had nothing to worry about. Later in the evening, the girls talked about how impressed they were with Hiraku's Giga Chad ways. He tamed a whole pack of Inferno Wolves as well as a demon spider. The crops he grew were one of a kind as well. However, he was an ignorant loser who knew nothing about the world. Zabuton approached Hiraku with a hostage he had captured so he could start milking it for honey. He built a house for the queen bee, and the worker bees built a nest within days. He then processed a plot of land for a reservoir and told Leah he had planned to draw water through a waterway from a nearby river. She asked how far he had made it in the progression with the construction, but he hadn't started yet. Hiraku thought about using stone, however. Leah thought that would be too difficult to find in the forest. He decided to compact the dirt using the farming tool to create blocks as hard as concrete. They built up the foundation using dirt and created an intake gate for the water at the top of the waterfall. Then they began placing the parts for the waterway above. Hiraku focused on sealing the seams and strengthening the foundation while he let the elves handle the basic foundation work. Thanks to the girls, the construction happened a lot faster than he expected. Suddenly, a giant fish came flopping onto the waterway and got massacred in one shot from the farming tool. Hiraku put it on a stick and began roasting it while the girls stared in vile disgust. Meanwhile, Lu and Tia wondered if it was safe to eat. Once it was done, he offered it to his wives first, however. They didn't want that vile garbage. Hiraku took a bite and thought it tasted like salted salmon. He then passed them both a plate, and when they took a bite, their water faucets erupted and exploded.
Nice.
They all loved it, so they caught more and preserved them with salt so they could store them. He created 2 more crop fields and released the water into them. He instructed the elves to poke holes into the dirt and then showed them how to plant the seedlings. After they were done, he put Zabuton's little soldiers in charge of keeping pests out. Within 3 days, the rice plants had already finished growing, and thanks to the girls, harvesting them was done within seconds. Afterwards, he turned the farming tool into a thresher, then began threshing the rice plants. Next, they placed them through a sieve to remove any extra leaves or plant matter. Then he used a mortar to remove the husk from the rice. Once he was done, Lu and Tia asked if they could finally eat it, but they couldn't. Hiraku explained hydrothermal cooking in a kettle, but their peasant minds thought it was a type of magic spell. He asked Lu to light the fire, and she was about to activate an S-rank spell. However, Hiraku suggested a slow and low flame. Once it was done, he shaped them into onigiri, then passed it to them, but they weren't impressed at all. However, after taking a bite, they all thought it tasted delicious as well. Lu noticed the fried fish from the other day inside. When Hiraku went to eat one, the homeless elves already ate the rest. After a hard day's work, all of the girls cleaned themselves off with magic, while the peasant was still filthy, so he decided to build himself a bathhouse. They made stools to sit on inside and made sure the bath was large enough for multiple backs to be blown out in multiple sessions.
Yeah, boy.
Hiraku asked Lu where their wastewater should go. However, Tia suggested using Rimirus to clean them up. They eat waste and dead organic matter, then purify it. Tia came back with one and presented it to Hiraku. He asked if the others would eat them, and only Zabuton volunteered.
That's disgusting.
He noticed some mushrooms growing and went to ask everyone for their opinions if it was poisonous or edible. However, they all had different opinions, so he decided to grow all of the magic gooms he could. At the end of the day, Hiraku tried to explain to the peasants how to properly bathe themselves, but instead Leah asked for a demonstration. Hiraku removed his dirty rags, rinsed and scrubbed, then hopped in and melted. The warmth caused him to become delirious, and when he came to, all of the elves decided to jump in and join him to get their peaches demolished, causing him to hide his overflowing creamy cannoli. The following day, the dogs found 5 new cream dumpsters in the forest. Their names were Lafa, Lhasa, Lalasha, Lalu, and Lami. They all used to live in the same village as Leah and the rest of the Lees. They had been wandering around homeless, and it had been 200 years since they've seen each other. They finally found a home and planned to start breeding to repopulate. They decided to build them a house, and Leah suggested making improvements to Hiraku's home as well. Leah then excitedly announced that they all planned to ride his immortal farming glizzy.
Yeah, boy.
Meanwhile, Kuro noticed his master getting ready to breed with the new villagers, and thought, what an alpha. Before he met Hiraku, he was nameless. He had spent his whole life in the forest of death and had never lost a fight to another male. He planned to live the life of a ruthless YN, but one day he met a bad bitch. However, he was no match for her grip strength. They began traveling together, and sometime after cracking, her belly began to grow. One day, they encountered a grappler bear and it stomped them both, but it didn't kill them. They found themselves in this part of the forest. They found a human male, and Kuro wondered how such a weak man survived in a ruthless forest. However, he felt divine power coming from his strange tool. He shared the meat of the gate boar with them, which impressed him that he was able to hunt such a fine beast. After the puppies came, they decided to make him their new master. He gave them names as well as a home to live in. Before long, their puppies had puppies and their family grew bigger. Their master became a pack leader as well, and noticing all of the massive cantaloupe, heavy artillery hanging around, he realized his master was no ordinary Giga Chad. Once Hiraku and the girls finished their new mansion, they gave him a tour of the interior. They showed him the dining area and the cellar where they had planned to store food and firewood. They were excited to present their individual peach demolishing rooms. However, Hiraku was fascinated with the room in the back of the house with a bolt lock on the outside. When he opened it, he noticed there wasn't a handle on the inside and realized it was the room where all 14 of them planned to ride his golden carrot.
Yeah, boy.
He quickly shut the door and ignored it. Afterwards, Hiraku went and placed statues of Kuro and Yuki outside the doors. Lu and Tia came in and asked what he was cooking today. He told them curry, and since they had never heard of it before, he took them outside to pick the many different spices for it. After picking out a few different ones, he came across some cilantro, and when he asked the dogs how it smelled, they immediately retreated out of fear. The girls noticed he had something capable of defeating the monstrosities roaming around and realized they could use it against them. When Hiraku laid out all the ingredients on the table, the only one that showed up to help was the baddie Leah. She mentioned that Lu and Tia were researching some ancient, all-powerful protection talisman. They started to prepare the curry, and Leah liked the way it smelled. Hiraku realized he forgot the naan and thought about eating the curry with rice, but he wanted naan instead. They made enough for everyone everyone because they were all some fat cows, and when it was served, they all looked at it with utter disgust. Hiraku taught them how to eat it, and when they saw him enjoying himself, they started eating as well. All of their floodgates opened immediately as they finished up their first bowl and all lined up for seconds while he asked them to save some for him. Lu and Tia showed a bowl of vile disgust to the wolves and they took off running again. Winter was coming, so Hiraku loaded up on firewood to stay warm during the elven breeding.
Nice.
He traded fresh taters for new blankets with Zabuton since she was going to hibernate during the winter. Leah spent her time working on the forge and some other projects. Lu and Tia were tasked with preserving the meat for the winter using their magic. He wanted to stock up as much as possible since the wolves couldn't hunt during the snow. He had planned to store the fruits and vegetables by placing a sheet over them and burying them under the snow. Hiraku looked over at the girls and felt jealous at their ability to use magic and decided to try it himself. However, he quickly realized he was pathetic like the main character from ReZero.
Emotional damage!
He spoke to his first wife about it and felt that he was useless compared to them. All he did was farming and cooking. However, Lu didn't think that at all. She thought he was the most amazing one out of all of them. She mentioned not just anyone could survive in the forest of death by themselves. Lu claimed he had been the only one to have ever done it and began glazing his farmer Glizzy like no other. When winter arrived, he made a reversi, chess, and a mahjong set to play with. When Hiraku explained reversi, Lu asked if it was really that simple, however. The simpleton mentioned it was the simplest games that brought out the most complex strategies. Lu then challenged the angelic melon cannons to a duel to settle an old beef. During their duel, Lu was visibly struggling because she was an even bigger simpleton, but suddenly, she flipped the board like a sore loser. Tia, however, used her magic to move the board and pieces back to exactly where they were. Lu thought that was an embarrassing use of magic, causing her to press the reset button once more. Hiraku walked over to the next room and saw Kuro and Yuki having a massive standoff in a chess tournament finals. Lu stepped up to face the winner, but Yuki pulled a scholar's mate and won in 4 moves, while Lu didn't have the courage to press the reset button that time. Next, he hopped in a mahjong game with Lafa, Kuro, Leah, and Tia. He noticed Kuro playing and thought there was no way a stupid mutt could understand the game yet. He confidently thought he had the winning hand, however. All of them spanked him and took the pot. The 2 simpletons had their dignity crushed as they sat in the corner. Hiraku realized he and Lu were garbage and built a bowling set to make up the L's. He managed to hit a spare. However, Lu hit a strike, taking a dump on his pride. They all enjoyed the games during the day, ate ramen for dinner, and participated in clapping festivities during the night. After the winter had passed, Hiraku called out to Zabuton for some new springtime drip. However, they suddenly heard her ringing the alarm. They ran out and looked around, then noticed a wyvern flying straight toward them. Hiraku wondered if it wouldn't attack them. However, the wyvern approached and shot a fireball at them, but Lu and Tia blocked it with a barrier. Hiraku thought about what he could do to help, then suddenly, his farming tool turned into a legendary spear. He threw it straight at the wyvern and penetrated its barrier and blasted a hole into its wing. Once it came back, he tossed it again and obliterated it through the chest. Lu and Tia couldn't believe their eyes as their water faucets erupted from the glory of killing a wyvern. There was damage to the crop fields, but the buildings were untouched. As they approached its corpse, Hiraku asked if they thought someone would have sent this to attack. However, they thought it was a wild creature acting on its own since they were quite valuable and very unlikely to be sent off to attack a peasant farm on its own. They brought it back so he could cook multiple different dishes using that disgusting monstrosity. During dinner, Lu asked Tia if she thought she could block a penetration from the legendary spear, but she said no. It penetrated a 3-layer barrier from a wyvern, then annihilated it through the chest. Then they thought how lucky they were to be taken in by such a strong S-rank Giga Chad. Meanwhile, 3 of the 4 Demon Lord generals sat in discussion at the Demon Lord's castle. A report came in informing them that a wyvern was massacred and killed from a ground assault in 2 blows. One of them suggested mobilizing their army, but they didn't think they would be powerful enough. Another great dragon was informed of the battle by his servant who observed it and asked if he were to take an attack would he survive, and the man said no. He would advise against a confrontation with the legendary peasant.
What do you mean by that?
Hiraku announced they were going to make wine from their grapes, and the degenerate elves all got excited and immediately volunteered to help out. Once collected, he instructed the melon cannons to stomp on the grapes to make the wine, while he stood up in the front so he could catch a sniff of the wine. He told them to move in a circular motion to get the proper movements, but Tia ended up slipping and falling.
Yeah, boy.
The elves suggested moving in rhythm to a song to stay in sync. They started to sing a song they used to sing in their village before it got burned down. They were enjoying themselves, then asked Hiraku to join in the fun. They made 16 barrels, and Hiraku wondered if they made too much, but the girls thought they would have no problem drinking it all during breeding season. Meanwhile, the goddess of agriculture ridiculed the supreme being, her father, for giving Hiraku cancer in his past life, then placing him in the forest of death. She mentioned the legendary farming tool he bestowed upon him being actually a divine spear with immense power, too much for a human to withstand. However, his super high vitality had been keeping him stable and avoiding death. She then demanded to know why the statue to honor her was a statue of some disgusting old geezer. One day, Hiraku came across yet another girl in the forest.
Yeah, boy.
They found out she was Flora, Lou's little sister. When they told her they were married, Flora asked if she was really getting her back blown by a weak human. However, Lou explained he was the cult leader there, the master of all the inferno wolves, and he even took down a wyvern. Flora then prostrated herself and apologized to his massive meat stick. When Hiraku noticed Lou called Crow an inferno wolf, he realized he never knew they were wolves and thought they were cute puppies the entire time. Hiraku then prepared a meal for her as an apology for the wolves tearing her clothes apart for him to crack.
Yes! 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 Yes!
After freeloading for a few days, Flora left so she could make preparations to move back. She returned a month later and brought a group of busty baddies. Their representative named Anne introduced herself and told him to use them as he saw fit.
What do you mean by that?
And they brought fattened up, disgusting cows so they could start producing milk. Tia noticed everyone's families together and realized she was a lonely 63-year-old, then requested she take some time away, then flew off. When she came back, she brought her local slaves. The three angels were Graham Marie, Kudel, and Coronet. The disgusting lizard man representative was Daga. They brought a chicken with them to start farming eggs and making Kentucky fried chicken. Hiraku complimented her on her quick thinking, which led to her floodgates overflowing. The maids belonged to a race of ogres, and they were well efficient in cleaning, however. They had absolutely no kitchen skills, so Hiraku taught them all the different methods of modern-day Gordon Ramsay cooking. Ever since the wyvern attack, Tia had been paranoid, so she instructed the angels she brought back to act as security. The lizard men acted as the new slaves for any manual labor, so the elves could focus on clapping for the village and making babies. Leah then brought over the rest of the homeless elves, still wandering the forest for 200 years. Hiraku asked where the men were, but Leah informed him that none of them survived the war. However, they had planned to ride his charged up shish kebab so they could repopulate. Hiraku called in the leaders of every group in the village for a special discussion. He told them he wanted to name their breeding settlement and asked for suggestions. Anne suggested naming it after the forest, however. Hiraku had no idea what it was called and asked. They told him it was called the Forest of Death and thought up the Village of Death, but none of them were fond of that name. Zabuton raised her hand and pointed out the door. When Hiraku opened it, he looked at the massive tree, then suggested the Great Tree Village. They announced it to everyone at the end of the night during their banquet. When they poured up the purple drink, everyone began calling him the mayor and started glazing his divine farming staff. Grand Marie came by to inform the mayor that there was a messenger from the demonic kingdom. Bezel, one of the Demon King's 4 generals, arrived with a gift and a message from the Demon Lord to discuss the status of their settlement. Hiraku wondered if they wanted him to pay taxes, then declared that if they were allowed to stay, he would offer a part of their harvest every year. However, Hiraku was unaware Bezel was fully expecting retaliation and warfare, but he wanted to show he had no intention of rebelling. He offered up 10% of their harvest, which completely surprised Bezel. Hiraku asked that they come and pick it up every year, and Bezel accepted the terms. They went inside and wrote up a contract. The offering was limited to what was grown on the fields. Any milk, eggs, honey, or good drink that was produced would have to be purchased at a separate price. Hiraku felt he was too aggressive, so he sent him off with a gift. After he left, Lou complimented him on his negotiations and noted that now they were technically under the Demon Lord's protection. However, Tia ridiculed the man for accepting 10% since the usual going rate was 60%. When Bezel informed the other generals, they were astounded that they submitted to their military even though they were capable of defeating a wyvern. They demanded to know why he accepted only 10%. However, the Angel of Annihilation Tia and the vampire Princess Lulacy was present. A pack of inferno wolves, as well as an army of high elves, guarded the entire camp. The group that captured him and led him in was the trio of killer angels. They requested to be under the protection of the Demon Lord's army by offering a tax payment. If he refused, they would have mobilized their army immediately. When they opened the present, they saw fruit and tasted it for poison. However, they thought it was delicious. The cloth it was wrapped in was created from a greater demon spider, a beast that fought the previous demon lord to a standstill. The following morning, the one true ruler of the dragons, Drime, had arrived. His servant presented a sword as a gift to them. He mentioned His Majesty master's lair was just south of their settlement and had come to offer a formal greeting. Drime turned into his human form and got wasted on their delicious good drink, then went home at 5 a.m. like a degenerate. Hiraku asked his construction crew about building a guest house for visitors, and Leia suggested building something large enough to house 30 people. They began building, and Hiraku gave Zabuton a new signal so she wouldn't sound like a ritualistic cult leader every time someone arrived. He suggested instead of capturing and bringing the visitors in, they greet them with a welcoming party of Lu, Tia, himself, high elves, ogre maids, and lizard men. Days later, the alarm went off. A group of peasant beast folk arrived hoping to establish relations. The man's name was Garf, and he said they traveled through the mountains east of them from a village called Howling Village. Lu asked if this was everyone in their party, and they said it was. Then Lu suggested killing off everyone else. The others came out with the wolves surrounding them. The man apologized. Then Lu told them to behave within the village, or they would be executed immediately. Lu led them to the guest house, and when the poverty-stricken losers saw all the maids, their water guns imploded.
Nice.
After they were seated, Lu and Tia locked them in. Hiraku asked why they were trapping them inside. However, Tia mentioned the fact that these poor peasants didn't bring a gift, and she was concerned with them leaving 2 soldiers in the woods. Lu thought they didn't deserve any type of hospitality since it was custom to bring a gift when establishing relations. Hiraku noticed the food they prepared for them wasn't as great as it was for Drime, but Anne thought that peasants didn't deserve such luxury. He then asked if they were going to serve them wine, but all her greedy ass could do was glare. Lu and Tia thought he was being soft for allowing them 2 cups of wine each. Hiraku walked up and asked what kind of place Howling Village was. Garf said 5 settlements of poor-ass beast folk that made their living hunting and mining. They did trade with a human village across the mountains, but they cut them off because they were filthy animals.
Emotional damage!
Hiraku asked where they heard about the Great Tree Village, and Garf said they heard word of it from one of the Demon Lord's slaves. The following morning, Garf asked if they would be willing to travel to their village to make trade since they were weak and couldn't travel through the forest safely. Hiraku thought about making the trip with Kuro and the kids, then agreed. Garf offered paints, silverware, glassworks, and metalworks in exchange for the food they grew, and Hiraku wanted it all. Before departing, Garf apologized for not bringing a gift, and they truly didn't know it was a custom until the day before. They admitted their peasant village had a combined net worth of 89 cents and wouldn't be able to afford anything fancy. However, Hiraku told them not to bring anything if it turned out to be utter trash. When it was time to depart, Tia volunteered to be his representative and make the trip for him. The trip would have taken 10 days, but Drime offered to fly them for a barrel of wine.
Yeah, boy.
Ever since his first visit, he had been regularly stopping by to indulge in the lovely elven cantaloupes they grew, and he always brought gifts and treasures for the first 3 wives. When they arrived, the beast folk thought they were about to be obliterated until they saw a pair of heavenly melon cannons descending upon their village. When they got back, they sold everything and even sold Drime's barrel of wine. Tia informed him that they wanted to send 20 beast folk baddies to help populate the village, and Hiraku agreed if they threw in a few men. When they arrived, a busty baddie named Sena introduced herself and said she was mentally prepared to start clapping for the village, but requested not to be abandoned after the festival.
Yes! 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 Yes!
Hiraku said they didn't have to worry about getting kicked out as long as she threw it back every night, which made her water fountain erupt.
Yeah, boy.
He then asked if they brought the men with them. However, they brought 3 new YNs for the future of the village and the elven race. Apparently, all of the beast girls thought they were going to be treated as slaves and never expected to be given housing and food every day. However, they fainted every time Zabuton waved. Hiraku noticed the busty baddie using magic, then asked Tia if he was the only one in the village that was a magicless wimp. Everyone began flexing their unique talents and bragging in front of him. Even the village mascots had more talent than him. When Rimuru showed off his fire magic, Sena tried to comfort him and told him he wasn't that pathetic.
Damn!
Suddenly, the ground shook, and Grand Marie arrived from her patrol to inform him that a grappler bear and a bloody viper were fighting in the forest. Hiraku asked if she thought they could cook them up, then instructed her to take him to the battlefield. When they spotted Godzilla and Kong, he told her to take him down. They swooped down and unalived them both in one blow yet again. The trio thought the mare was truly terrifying for taking them both down in one strike. Kuro watched, horrified, because that was the beast that whooped his ass just before he met Hiraku, while the other angels started glazing the mare's strength. He taught Anne and the others how to make a bear stew, and when he added the wine, it was like a forbidden ritual was performed in front of them. When the degenerates saw the finished product, they were saddened that the sacred wine was wasted. When he ate the fried viper, he noticed it tasted like KFC and thought it was missing something. Hiraku paid Flora a visit and asked if she had any medicines that could kill harmful microorganisms, something that could prevent stomach aches or illness. After she handed him the medicine, he asked how the miso was coming. However, she had no luck and had to rebuild her hut 3 times. The next morning, he took Flora into the kitchen to show her how to properly make the miso. Then they placed it in the cellar to age for a few months. Lou came down to inform him he had visitors. It was a group of dwarves led by a man named Donovan. They had heard they produced that good drank in this village and wanted to try some. Hiraku was happy to share. However, the line of degenerates behind him declined and demanded premium subscription payment for it.
No.
Donovan apologized, claiming they were poor brokies. However, they had alcohol production technology. They heard about the fine crops in the village and could turn it into fine alcohol. When they heard, all 4 water fountains erupted.
Nice.
The men got to work immediately and presented corn whiskey. They ended up moving in and working as the village's brewery. Later that evening, they had a welcome party for the beast baddies and the alcoholic dwarves. They all got drunk while they tested the mayonnaise that Hiraku had produced in the basement. Suddenly, Drime appeared to freeload. However, Gucci Man came and subdued him. Hiraku noticed he finally had some masculinity in the village, but when he asked Donovan if he wanted to crack any of the baddies currently present, he told him he thought they were all fine shits. However, if they didn't have a beard, he wasn't clapping. The next day, a dragon came flying toward the village.
Damn!
Hiraku summoned his divine spear. However, Drime slid through and T-boned it in the face. He noticed another monstrosity heading straight for Drime, threw the spear straight at its head, but it dodged at the last second. Gucci Mane appeared to stop him and told him it wasn't an enemy. They all transformed, and Gucci introduced them as Drime's wife and daughter, Lastus Moon and Graphaloon. Apparently, Drime kept stealing out of their treasury and sneaking out to purchase Street Lizard's activities with the village's residents. However, they realized he was too much of a coward to have an affair. The lizard baddies then apologized for attempting to burn down the village. After Hiraku went back, Graphaloon realized why Drime was going there. That spear was so fast and powerful she couldn't even defend and was forced to dodge. Even that was someone else's doing. If she didn't evade, she would have been the villagers' dinner tonight. She then instructed Lastus to move in and start clapping for the dragon race with Hiraku so they wouldn't be annihilated in the future.
My man.
Lastus went back into the village and asked them to call her Lasty. She was enthusiastic about working. However, everything she touched was destroyed or exploded. Hiraku noticed the puppers were terrified of Lasty, and Tia mentioned the moos and cuckoos were as well. She said they were terrifying creatures. However, they possessed a very high intellect, so he put her in charge of diplomatic relations. Beazle came to visit, and when he laid his eyes on her, his heart stopped and started again. He asked if there were any more apples, but they were out of stock. When she mentioned they had strawberries, the fear made him order 10 boxes. Lasty told him they had a bunch of other fruits as well, and he took boxes of those as well. Beazle went back and informed the other generals they had dragons now, and one suggested sending a spy. Beazle went home and tasked his daughter Florim to go and investigate the village. Florim arrived and noticed the village's infrastructure was impressive. She descended and was immediately greeted by Lasty, who was informed by Beazle for her arrival. Florim realized it was Lastus Moon, the infamous dragon that was known for rampages. When Lasty showed her the vineyard, Grand Marie came by to get Lasty since they had another visitor, leaving Florim all alone. She looked around and saw dwarves, beast folk, and ogres, as well as lizard men. She spotted the vampire princess, the angel of annihilation, and the trio of killer angels, an army of high elves who prey on young human men and kidnap them for clapping festivities.
Yeah, boy.
Florim was horrified at the sight of a fully tamed pack of inferno wolves and demon spiders. She wondered who the mayor was and what type of terrifying monstrosity he could be to be ruling over this incredible army. Suddenly, a homeless man walked by and asked if she was lost. However, she stormed off and called him a pathetic human. Florim got back and was informed that the weak human was the mayor. However, she couldn't believe it. Lasty told her that he was strong enough to penetrate her mother's defenses and blow her back out midair.
Nice.
And that stunned her speechless. One day, the little Rimurus that Tia brought began multiplying into many different types of slimes, even an alcoholic one. It drank an entire barrel, which surprised them since Drime could only drink half a barrel at a time. All of the alcoholic residents demanded that the Malium-colored Rimuru be executed immediately with no trial whatsoever. However, Florem somehow convinced everyone to spare its life and allow it to live amongst them. When he mentioned seafood could possibly make their hot pots better, all of the degenerates were immediately intrigued and asked. Hiraku described seafood delicacies from his world and put them all into a delicious seafood hot pot. Lou ordered Flora to start researching seafood immediately. Tia thought of monsters and asked if they could eat those, while Sena was in distress. Flora mentioned a port city in the demonic kingdom south from the village. There was a merchant there who dealt with a lot of fish products, and Lasty offered to fly everyone there. 3 days later, they returned with an established merchant named Michael from the port city of Shishato. Hiraku introduced himself and thanked him for coming to their village. Michael presented the best fish he had on the market. However, he would need some time to acquire the seaweed called kombu he requested. Michael then told him he had 3 goals for coming to the village. First was to properly greet and glaze his glizzy for requesting to do business with him. Second was to suggest new opportunities to do more business together in the future. And third was to be the official purveyor of this village to the outside world. All of the crops they had there weren't found anywhere else in their broke-ass country and offered to get him premium prices then, if they traded them. Lou and Tia stepped in to negotiate since Hiraku was an ignorant bum. Before departing, the greedy juice man asked if they could make a deal on the alcohol next time. However, Lasty declared he would be executed if he spoke of the sacred good drank once again. He apologized for his ignorance and left riding on top of Lasty. Days earlier, Michael had a visitor come without an appointment, and he told his servant to tell them to get lost. However, he had a gut feeling telling him he couldn't ignore them. When the guest came in, it was the young lady of the Chrome family. He would have been executed immediately if he told them to get lost. Lastis Moon of the Dragons introduced herself, and the man looked at her with utter horror. Trading with the daughter of one of the Demon Lord's generals and a crazy bitch dragon sent his risk meter up. However, when he saw their product, his merchant saber lit up in a different color. Lasty held up a drawing, and the man turned then said they could have whatever they desired. He then ordered his slave to get the best fishes from the market and demanded that they pack his bags for a trip, and he would be making the delivery personally. They stopped at Drime's castle on the way, and he shit his pants meeting the legendary dragons. He met the Angel of Annihilation, Trio Murdering Angels, and Inferno Wolves upon arrival and diarrheaed next. When he met the mayor, he was relieved he was human until the vampire princess stepped in. Then Lasty declared he would be executed if he requested alcohol once more. All in all, he shitted his pants 5 times or so. However, he was going to get rich off this deal. When Hiraku cooked up a seafood hot pot, every water fountain in the room erupted as they got ready for major clappage tonight.
Yeah, boy.
The next day, a white dragon appeared before Hiraku. It shot a fireball nearby and taunted him. Hiraku threw his spear but missed. However, it teleported back and he took it down on the next shot. Hiraku demanded to know why she burnt part of the forest. However, Drime arrived and told him she was his older sister Hakuran. Her excuse was that Drime told her he was giving Lasty away to be clapped up by some random farming peasant.
Nice.
But Drime claimed to have said that while extremely wasted. Hiraku asked why she didn't just come and talk like a normal person, but she heard rumors of how powerful his immortal farming staff was and wanted to give it a test ride. However, Drime said she was just here to vent anger since her niece was getting married before her because she's 900 years older.
Emotional damage!
Hiraku then gripped her head with immense force and told her she had to clean up the forest for being a childish arsonist, then sent her off in her dragon form. After dinner, Hakuran asked about the mahjong set she heard about, and when Hiraku tried to explain the rules, she said she would figure it out. Hakuran asked what they should bet on, and all of the dragon's competitive sides came out. Hiraku accidentally suggested playing strip mahjong, and the others got excited at the thought of it. They turned the house into a dark and ominous sight, a horror film straight out of The Nun. The dragons were all competitive and still very serious, even though they had Hiraku down to his draws, ready to present Lasty a golden carrot. After losing, they all demanded that the magic shorts come off, and he unleashed the legendary golden carrot to begin the clapping marathon. However, Drime can only watch from a distance. Beazle notified the others that the ancient dragon Hakuran had awoken and was spotted flying toward the Great Tree Village. Now, they had enough power to conquer the entire world. However, the Demon Lord asked about his daughter's mood swings instead. Hiraku gave Hakuran a job teaching since she wanted to stay, but she was a lazy bum that complained about everything. She told the kids to work hard so one day she could quit and not have to work anymore. One day, 3 baddie lamias approached the village and begged them to spare their lives and not clap them up. Apparently, the young wolves and spiders found a nearby dungeon and cleared it, bodying every single monster inside and forcing the lamia to flee. Hiraku then gave them some fruits for the precious gems they had and straight scammed them, then told them to come dressed properly and not look like 304s next time. Meanwhile, the three politically powerful idiots convinced the demon princess that Florum was held hostage at the peasant village and to raise an army. Beezle arrived, and Florum was busy handling the village's accounting. However, Beezle informed her that the princess was raising an army. While she had been away, the second daughter of the Gritch family, fourth daughter of the Boogle family, and the second daughter of the Mammon Rose family, the trio of politically powerful idiots, had been filling her head with lies, and they planned to attack this very village. They were coming tomorrow, and Beezle thought it'd be best if she and one of the villagers intercepted their invasion before they arrive. However, she thought it'd be best to be careful about which villager to choose. Otherwise, it might cause the destruction of the demonic kingdom. The following day, the starving Lamias wrecked their forces for 10 boxes of apples, causing them to surrender immediately. Florum brought them back to Hiraku and told him they were the new slaves and they were ready to clap for the village at any given time. They were old acquaintances of hers, and if they harmed the village, they could dispose of them if needed. She introduced Yuri and told him not to give her any special treatment since she was just as filthy as the three slaves. After Hiraku left them, Florum told them if they put in some real work in the cotton fields, their transgressions against the village would be forgiven, and to keep this from the other residents, they were not to divulge their identities. The princess was to be treated just like any other peasant. Later that night, the trio of idiots escaped, but were scared back in by Kuro and his pack. The next morning, they fainted again at the sight of Zabuton's cute ass. Florum then caught them and brought them back in to begin their slave work. Hiraku noticed they were working hard and offered them a round of clapping later that evening.
Yeah, boy.
Yuri noticed Florum petting an inferno wolf and asked if it was safe. She explained they were capable of destroying whole cities by themselves, but when they were tamed by a super giga Chad, they had no issues living with people. She threw the frisbee, then Kuro and his crew jumped for it like good boys. Yuri thought the village was so peaceful and wonderful and regretted her ignorance for trying to bring war and conflict to them. She thought the info about the dragons was a lie meant to deceive the demonic kingdom. However, she blamed Florum since she vanished without warning. She thought she became a hostage and was deeply worried she was getting clapped up by a random peasant.
Nice.
Yuri then threw a tantrum demanding she call her by her name and not princess, then told her to stop acting like a stranger. Florum then apologized and told her she would be open about her clapping partners moving forward. The trio of idiots began adapting to life in the village. When Lou stepped in, Hiraku noticed she hadn't changed into her older form lately.
Yeah, boy.
But she said her transformation magic hadn't been working. When it was time to depart, Sena sent Yuri off with a box of treats. She thanked them for the time spent, then told Florum to come visit. She asked if the village idiots were coming back. However, Florum was still holding them hostage. The Demon Lord asked what happened to Yuri. Ever since she got back, she became so dignified, and Beezle informed him that she had taken an interest into politics and had her back blown for the demonic kingdom by the S-rank farmer.
What do you mean by that?
The sight of this year's harvest made Hiraku's water gun implode and explode. Since it was so much, Lasti asked if they could send some to Drime, and when he agreed, Hakurin asked if she could send some to her parents as well. Hiraku agreed as well, but asked who the fuck were they. It was the Dragon Emperor Doze and the Hurricane Dragon Rai Malin. Hakurin thought those were overly exaggerated, while Hiraku thought they sounded like legendary Pokemon. Lasti flew to her degenerate father's castle, then to Shashado City to meet Michael. He asked her to exterminate a monster that had been attacking their Straw Hat ships. She took the job and obliterated it to smithereens. They gave her a meat stick from the monster as a reward for taking it down. Meanwhile, Hakurin headed north, then brought back a group of baddies that were looking for a home. Ya, the leader, introduced herself, and Hiraku asked if they were dark elves because he loved him some chocolate. However, they were mountain elves. Leia noted they were able to use fire and lived indoors as well. Hakurin noticed they were broke-back bums and brought them here to start clapping for the village.
Nice.
Ya offered to catch food for the village since they were excellent hunters. However, they were absolutely no match for the monsters living in the Forest of Death. They came back and asked if something was wrong with the forest, and Hiraku thought so too. He tried to show Ya his pottery skills, but it was utter garbage. He said they would have to look around for clay, and Ya volunteered her baddies for the job. They somehow found and came back with full-on clay pots. One day, Ya found another dungeon up north, and Leah suggested sending a survey team, while Kuro and Yuki were withdrawing from dungeon raids. While the survey team set off, the men's bathhouse was finally finished.
No! No! No!
The village idiots tried to spy on the mayor and got caught by Florum. They thought they would get a chance to grow closer to him by washing his back. However, Florim claimed they were the bottom of the barrel clapping material in the village, and there were plenty of other suitable candidates for the job. Days later, the survey team came back and found evidence of a blood viper. All of the elves demanded to hunt it down since the meat from the giant serpent was vital to the revival of their clan.
Yeah, boy.
Ya mentioned viper meat was incredibly valuable. It boosts one's vitality, increases husband-wife clapping festivities, and even blesses you with a baby. Hiraku came in, and Lu was bedridden for the first time. Sena mentioned her symptoms were similar to someone in her village who had their back blown. When they discovered Lu had gotten pregnant, she realized that was why she hadn't been able to transform. Once it was time for breakfast, they split it into 3 groups. The first couple wives and Flora were in the first group. The second group consisted of the maids, and the third were all of the baddies that got recruited last. Hakuren did so many extracurricular activities with Hiraku every night she didn't even make it to breakfast.
What do you mean by that?
Hiraku noticed Grand Marie and the other angels were always composed and proper. However, they did no chores and relied on Anne and the maids, as well as Daga, for everything. They were complete bums outside their duties. Hiraku had done all the major battles, so they were absolutely useless in protecting the village as well. During lunch, he ate the lunch Anne prepared for them with the angelic melon cannons and his lizard slave. Apparently, in this world, eating lunch was out of the ordinary. When Lu and Tia first arrived, they were surprised to be able to eat more than 1 meal a day. Leia and the High Elves were nervous about even eating breakfast and would skip out on eating sometimes. Sena was shocked to even be fed daily at all and thought they would get kicked out after being fed and having their backs blown. Hiraku wanted to make sure none of them had to worry about food as long as they were doing extracurricular activities with him. After lunch, Anne suggested regular training exercises for everyone in the village. However, she suggested it because she was getting fat eating 3 meals a day and needed to slim down for the clapping season. Hiraku overheard and thought about his legendary 2-second blast-offs and realized he needed to boost his pathetic stats. When he began training, he tired out almost instantly. He looked over at Ya's throwing knife and asked to try it, but his attempts looked just as pathetic as his 2-pump dumps. When Ya demonstrated her skills, Hiraku realized he wasn't suited for regular weapons, then pulled out his immortal farming spear and launched it across the forest. Flexing on the chocolate baddie, Anne served Hiraku a new menu item for dinner she'd created. He asked how confident she was about it, and she said 20%. Disappointed in her response, he requested he only be served 50% and higher dishes moving forward. However, Anne declared he had to eat every meal no matter how garbage so they don't waste food. When he took a bite, it tasted like vile trash. However, the monster baddies loved it because their peasant taste buds still hadn't evolved yet, especially the ancient pig Hakuren. After dinner, Hiraku took a bath alone. He had it to himself since he couldn't get comfortable in Goon on the other side and decided to waste such a divine blessing.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
Once he started to end the night, he began to feel uneasy. As he walked into his home, the High Elves all began stalking their prey. When he sat down, he still felt their eyes on him, then called out as if he was in danger and the baddies jumped out, but they quickly retreated when they realized he was okay. Hiraku laid down and thought even though they wouldn't leave his bone alone, he thanked God for giving him this new life. The dwarves spent every day making that sacred drink. Hiraku always thought dwarves were struggling alcoholics. However, Donovan and the others were strictly against drinking on the job and were quite responsible. He then requested to increase the current harvest of grapes by 3 times to produce more sacred drink. While looking over the vineyard, Sena came over and told him a strange man was in the village. The progenitor greeted Flora and congratulated Lu, then told them he had come because he'd heard that Lu had gotten clapped up and was expecting. Hiraku asked who the heck this man was, and Lu told him he was the first vampire. He was 4,000 years old. He said the trick to a long and healthy life was to erase your memories occasionally. The last time he did it was around 200 years ago, so he was clinically insane. He then apologized for entering the village without permission. He had only planned to have a look around, but was attracted to the statue of the supreme being below the great tree. Hiraku asked if he had met God before, and he did, only once when he was born. God told him to do his best, even though he had an abnormal body. Even though he had erased his memories so many times, he felt he had done his best. But for some reason, he couldn't remember his exact appearance. He then started glazing him and spoke about how jealous he was. Hiraku realized he wanted the statue and told him he couldn't have it since he was a nobody. However, he offered to create a new one for him. Once it was done, he prostrated himself again. Before departing, he told Lou and Flora to stay healthy, then thanked the mayor for the statue and for taking care of Lou. The Vampire King arrived back at the capital's church after 50 years, and the young boy he used to diddle around with grew into an old priest. He ordered them to remove the statue of the creator, sculpted by the famous sculptor he didn't remember the name of, and replace it with the sculpture of the supreme being he had brought. Once it was placed, the priest requested the name of such a master craftsman. However, the progenitor mentioned a peasant such as him wasn't worthy of hearing it. He sent Hiraku a fancy Beethoven piano as a gift for the baby, and they placed it in the dining hall. The village idiots saw it and noticed it was the kind that was only found in large temples or castles. They wanted to play it for bragging rights, but quickly chickened out when they realized they would be executed if they broke it. They then made a request to their mayor for a beaten-up, old, and raggedy piano for them to practice on. Hiraku asked if they could just play the one they had, but they began crying. He then made a request to the juice man to procure a practice piano for the village idiots. After it was set up, all of the village peasants took turns practicing and even practiced into the night. After working the fields, Hiraku called out to the girls to start preparing lunch. While tending the crops, his main piece called out to him to come have lunch with the others. He asked her if she was feeling well and told her to take it easy, but she told him to relax as well, or else he might collapse from exhaustion. Lou told him the girls had been giving her all types of advice on the pregnancy, and a few of the ogre maids had already been clapped and had children, and that made him relieved since he was an ignorant first-timer. Later that night, Hakuren and the others were worried and asked if she needed anything. However, she was fine, but the only thing that was difficult was she couldn't partake in the sacred booze anymore. The next day, the degenerate residents did the unthinkable. They requested that Hiraku sell the rest of the sacred booze since they had all planned to stop drinking for Lou. Hiraku was glad to see how supportive they were. However, since they were all in love with liver failure, this caused extreme depression amongst the residents. But Hiraku refused and explained how long it takes to make good booze before suggesting they store it and let it age for a better taste. Donovan asked if he had done something wrong since none of the baddies were drinking his sacred booze anymore. But Hiraku explained what was going on with Lou, and Donovan was immediately relieved and declared he would begin making more booze. Hiraku went to Lou's room to check on her because it was almost time for her to pop a squat and shoot one out. He noticed a flower, and she explained that Tia and the other angels got it for her. Ya came in and gave her the mountain elves' sacred medicine. Lasty came in with a gem she stole out of Drime's treasury that helps with magic recovery. Anne made her a pudding she had been working on. And Leah gave her a piece of garbage the elves put together in the woods, while Flora came in with tomato and tofu miso soup. Daga didn't have anything to offer since he was a filthy bum, then offered up his blood, but she didn't think she could bite through his tough skin. Lou began going into labor, so the ogre maids started getting prepared for the baby, while Hiraku went to the tree where he spent his first night and thought about how fulfilling his life was compared to his last. Having everyone with him gave him reassurance that everything would be just fine. The next morning, he went to check on them, and Lou told him to come and hold his son. When he picked him up, all of the girls told him to be gentle and support the neck. He realized he was a father, and prayed to God he wouldn't have to deal with the same hardships he had in his past life. Then Lou reassured him that they would raise him to be strong and healthy, and they named the boy Gojo. Hiraku thought about how much the village had grown and gathered everyone and told them he wanted to implement a new reward system, where he would give them small coins that they could use to buy goods and services. He had been distributing everything himself whenever a resident had a request, but it had become more difficult since the village had grown so much. They asked why they couldn't just trade goods, but he explained it was because everyone values everything differently. But it wouldn't be a problem with the new currency system. He gave Kuro and Zabuton's families 30 coins each and each resident 3 coins. They used them for items they wanted, but it made the demand and production of these items increase. One of the kids gave Hiraku a coin and requested a baby, but he explained he couldn't do that since he wasn't Diddy. Days later, Hiraku threw a banquet to welcome the birth of his son Alfred to the family. Lou felt bad for making everyone wait, but they couldn't throw a feast right after she gave birth. Hiraku helped her open the specially made wine with the wooden mallet from Donovan. Donovan asked how they liked the sacred booze, and Lou told him she couldn't drink while milking for Alfred. He suggested saving a bottle of it so she could let it age before she drank it. At the Demon Lord's castle, Beazle informed everyone of Alfred's birth, and they were horrified at the fact that they were breeding monsters. They suggested maintaining good relations and marrying off someone from the Demon Kingdom. However, the Demon Lord refused to let Yuri get her back blown. Meanwhile, Michael prepared a gift for Hiraku and thought he should congratulate him properly, since he wanted to continue to milk the village for riches. Back in the village, the girls informed Hiraku that there were about 100 war refugee peasants that needed housing and wanted to move in. They all suggested helping to build another village to set up for all the new baddies to start clapping for the village. Drop a comment if you want season 2, and watch this video next.